All right. So when it comes to the playoff contenders here, guys, we have our Donovan, you came up with the idea of the tiers, and I'm going to throw up here on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and throw up our ACC tiers first, and we're just going to kind of hit the tiers of each conference, and then we'll come back and break them down after that. But here's our ACC tiers. So Donovan, go ahead and let the people know what they're looking at right here on the YouTube.
Yeah, we'll go bottom up like we did last time. So tier 4, yikes. I mean, Georgia Tech and Syracuse, there's not much to be said about them. They are in the bottom feeders of the ACC. Tier 3, prove me wrong. Again, we might disagree with some of these. Wake Forest and Louisville, again, nothing too exciting. Florida State, a dominant college football program. But I don't know. I think they're in the tier 3, the prove me wrong stage right now. Tier 2, enjoy your bowl game. Not much to be said. They're going to go play a bowl game a couple of days before New Year's Eve or a couple of days after, New Year's. It's that's what you see is what you get with them. And then, of course, tier 1, the Kingpins, those that are the college football playoff contenders. And there we got Clemson and North Carolina.
Josh, anybody, and I'll throw that graphic back up here in just a minute, but wanted to get your opinion, just right off the bat. Obviously, we know Clemson and North Carolina are the two teams that are kind of favored to end up playing each other in the conference championship game this year. Also, Miami might have something to say about that. NC State is a good team right now. So just give an overarching view of the playoff picture that you think could come out of the ACC.
Well, I think you nailed it. Obviously Clemson and North Carolina, I think that's the clear-cut conference championship right there. Miami, if they come out, Derek King just looks insane from after his injury. Somehow beat Alabama, somehow get past North Carolina, even with one loss. And, if you beat Alabama, say you lose to North Carolina or vice versa, and you end up beating Clemson in the ACC championship, I think you have to be talked about, obviously, going into the playoffs if you're Miami. I think that's the only other tier 2 team that really has a chance. I think these other tier 2 teams are more of like the upset players, like NC State, a really good experienced team. They could upset one of these teams going towards the playoffs and ruin their season for them. Pitt, I'm more just looking at Kenny Pickett there. I'm not really looking too much at the teams. UVA, Virginia Tech, same things. All spoiler teams. And then obviously FSU. So, fans are going to hate us, but they just haven't shown anything. We can't say nothing good about them. We can't just sit there and live in the past like we were talking about Donovan before the show. We have to see something there, and I think Norvell just needs some more time to get things going back, especially recruiting-wise. But, man, Clemson, North Carolina, those are the real deals, and I honestly would have North Carolina over Clemson, and that's just not the Alabama in me saying that because I hate Clemson. I think North Carolina would beat Clemson if they played tomorrow.
Donovan, you do a lot of analysis for us in terms of what these teams are bringing back up front. Who has some of the – we know that battles are won in the trenches. Who has some of the strongest offensive line play returning in the ACC?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on Boston College. I mean, Boston College, I believe, is one of the most talented units in the country, right? They have one of the top centers in Tyler Lindstrom, who decided to come back. They got another first-teamer in Zion Johnson, right? So they have probably the 2 best interior offensive linemen in the ACC. They've got experienced tackles, back in Tyler Vrabel and Ben Petrula, and they probably have 3 of the 5 best offensive linemen in the ACC. I agree with what Josh said. They're not so much of a contender, right? They do bring, talented guys like Jalen Gill, the transfer from Ohio State. I'm not even going to attempt their quarterback's last name. I know his first name is Phil.
Phil Dracovic.
There we go.
Love his game. He's a baller.
He is, and he's got a great supporting cast, especially in the offensive line and some weapons around him. I think Boston College, like you said, Josh, isn't, they're in the tier where they're not Kingpin, and they're really not one of the teams that can escalate to a Kingpin, but they can play upset alert against one of those Kingpins.
They played Clemson really well last year. That to me, that was one of Phil Dracovic's best games. And then Zay Flowers, one of his favorite wide receivers, coming back. And like you said, Jalen Gill coming transfer over from Ohio State. They've got some weapons. This isn't like the old boring Boston College where they're going to run the ball with A.J. Dillon like 40 times a game a couple years ago. Like, this is an actual squad, and I love Phil. He was one of my top 5 sleeper quarterbacks in the entire Power 5 conference this season. He's the guy I'm watching closely. Puts up big numbers. They're really changing that offense at Boston College. So don't sleep on them. Like, they can absolutely be right there with Clemson again this year. They played them really close last year.
Y'all are talking a lot about Boston College. Here's the team that I think can end up being the proverbial fly in the ointment, so to speak, here in the ACC. and I'm going to go with the Wolfpack of NC State. And the reason for that, throw the Wolfpack up there. But the NC State, I'm going with they have 19 returning starters. Not only that, they return 95% of the production on their offense. They are returning a ton of production on their offense. I mean, it is a very, very good situation for NC State coming out. They get Devin Leary back, a dual threat quarterback. He broke his leg last year, 4 games into the year. He's back. He's 100%. They have guys, a 3-year starter, I think, is Gibson up front at the center position, and then they have a tackle. I can't pronounce his last name. Nwoku, Nwoku, that's going to be coming back. 2 guys that could be all conference, even all American type candidates. So 10 guys returning on defense. I mean, that is phenomenal when you have that. And guys, we'll talk more about a matchup with them on coming down the line once we get to the big 3, but just pay attention to NC State. I think that's a team that you need to watch out for, other than the obvious, Clemson and North Carolina. Now, guys, let's touch on, here we go, Donovan, your favorite, the playoff picture, what it looks like coming out of the Big Ten.
Let's roll. And again, Tier 4, Michigan State and Illinois. I still think they're a little – they have some of the recruiting talent, but Michigan State's still early under the new coaching era. In Illinois, I don't know. There's not much potential with them. And Tier 3, prove me wrong. There's some interesting teams in here, right? I think Minnesota and Maryland are the 2 most interesting ones. And we'll get into Minnesota a little bit, but, they got a talented quarterback, Tanner Morgan. They've got one of the top running backs in the country. And Maryland, again, I'm not even going to try and say his name. Tua's brother. There we go.
Baby Tagovailoa.
There we go. Josh is the Bama family expert, right? So we got Tier 3. Prove me wrong with those guys. Michigan, I only because I have respect for them as a rival. They're not in Tier 4. Tier 2, enjoy your bowl game. A lot of teams in here. Wisconsin and Iowa, I think the 2 most intriguing teams in there, as with Penn State and Indiana, and of course the kingpin of the conference and one of the kingpins of college football, the Ohio State University.
Yeah, Josh, what's your take on the Big Ten, other than Donovan's precious, the Ohio State coming out of there?
Well, you're right. You can't spell yikes without the I and the S. Illinois and Michigan State, and they are down bad. Like, I was looking at games to go to the first Saturday on the 11th, and being here in Virginia, I was like, UVA, Illinois. I was like, no, I think I'd rather just stay home and watch some games on TV. But you mentioned Ohio State. It's the same thing, it seems like, every year. And, they talked about it in the interview. They don't have like that one team that can really upset them this year. But just like we just talked about the ACC, there's still teams that can play that upset role. Like Indiana almost did it last year. And my guy, Ty Freifogel, one of my favorite wide receivers from Indiana, Donovan knows I love this guy because he balled out against Ohio State. And then Michael Penix is coming back. So they might be able to play that spoiler role. Then there's Northwestern, who's always got this stingy defense, and they get better every single year. They're not exciting. They're not fun, but they beat you up for 4 quarters, and it's close games. Like they hold you to under 21 majority of the time. And outside of that, like you said, there's some teams that have some good players like Minnesota with Tanner Morgan and Ingram. Or Muhammad, their running back, is one of the top running backs in the Big Ten. So I'm just looking at what team can possibly spoil them. And you mentioned it, Indiana, Wisconsin, I don't know. I just haven't seen enough out of them with Graham Mertz. But, man, Penn State, if they can get things going quick, they can play that spoiler role. But if it's me, Ohio State's making the playoffs. I mean, look at all the weapons they have coming back. You mentioned it with recruiting and everything. Can C.J. Stroud just come in and roll with that offense? If not, is he going to have these hiccups right away? I don't know. But I feel like they're huge, heavy favorites, and I honestly don't see them losing anybody.
I literally think that the Ohio State offense and scheme and the way that roster is built offensively, even though they're replacing Justin Fields and Trey Sermon, I believe that it's built in such a way that I could go play quarterback right there and look pretty productive right away. So I'm not worried about CJ Stroud going over there and just absolutely balling out to start off the year. I don't think they'll struggle early. I do think they have an interesting game against Oregon in week 2. That is going to be something that, I think CJ Stroud will be tested because Mario Cristobal, I think, is one of the better coaches. Josh, I even heard an opinion today that when Saban moves on, Mario Cristobal could be the next guy at Alabama.
I love it.
You
Bring him on back.
Yeah, you
He's
never
a heck
know.
of a recruiter, great recruiter, one of the top recruiters in college football. And like you mentioned, the offensive mind, that's one matchup I have circled right there on 9/11. Oregon goes to Ohio State. We talked about the linebacker core, how much they're replacing. Can that speed of Oregon eat up that second and third level for Ohio State and just milk the game out, run that clock, keep that clock going down? Maybe play a spoiler alert, but I think Ohio State's offense is just going to be too good against any Pac-12 defense, let alone Oregon's defense.
Yeah, and I think here the thing that I want to watch out for is everybody's kind of penciled in Wisconsin, over there in the West because it's over and over again. I think Iowa will have a lot to say about that. That is always a tough, blue collar type team. That could be something that really negates Ohio State if Iowa is able to. And Donovan, I'll let you bring up offensive line stuff, what it looks like. But if Iowa was able to be more methodical on offense and keep a team like Ohio State off the field, their offense off the field, and really, reduce a game, condense a game down, they could end up, winning against a Wisconsin and playing in Ohio State and giving them problems. Kurt Ferentz always does a good job of getting those guys prepared to play. And Kurt Ferentz is really just built a very respectable program at Iowa, not a place that you're going to get a ton of success recruiting, things like that with who you have to compete against, but he's a good builder of talent. Iowa seems to year in and year out put first and second round talent out in the NFL, especially on the offensive line. So Donovan, what does that offensive line return looking like for Iowa?
Yeah, they have 4 starters gone. We're not going to pretend that they don't have guys missing, but we know the culture of offensive line, like you said, the blue collar toughness at Iowa. Tyler Linderbaum returns as probably the best center in the country, right? And one thing with Iowa, I think when you look at their side of the Big Ten, it's tougher for a team like Iowa or Wisconsin to kind of not necessarily make it to the Big Ten championship, but when you don't have a clear-cut elite team in your division like Ohio State is in theirs, right? You kind of have to go through more of a gauntlet. Not saying that that division is in itself a gauntlet, but when you're not an elite team. So I think another benefit, another advantage for Ohio State is if Iowa, like you said, if the one to make it and in the Big Ten championship cause them to slip up, they're going to be more, I don't even want to say battle tested, they're going to be more wary, right? After going through that division, not having the same talent as, an elite team like Ohio State. But Iowa is a team, we know their culture. I like their offensive line, even with 4 starters gone. Again, it's Iowa. We know what they're going to bring to the table offensive line-wise.
Absolutely. And then our last conference we're going to touch on here in terms of playoff talk with our tiers is the Pac-12. Donovan, in our notes, you jokingly put, are we going to even pretend there is a kingpin in this conference? I think it's only fair to put Oregon here. And the more I mulled it over throughout the day, I almost moved Washington over there because people forget they actually won the Pac-12 North last year, but COVID preempted them from being able to participate in the conference championship game. Oregon gets put in, they go on a run, and everybody just kind of remembers what happened with Oregon. But never forget that Washington was a good ball club last year. But everybody needs to understand that the Pac-12 was so screwed up last year with deciding not to have a season and then having one late and only playing 6 games and a lot of those getting canceled because of COVID and things like that. But I'll just quickly run through this for time's sake. Of course, Oregon, the Kingpins, if you're listening to us via the podcast, we've got Oregon as the preeminent favorite, the Kingpins there. We've got Arizona State, Stanford, Washington, UCLA, and Utah in the tier 2, the enjoy your bowl game tier. Tier 3, prove me wrong, Cal, Washington State. Can Washington State recapture some of the magic they had under Mike Leach? Cal, where does the state of that program right now? And then Arizona coming off a 70-7, I think, beat down from Arizona State to end the year last year. They got sent Kevin Sumlin packing. That's an ouch thing there with the Yikes and Oregon State. I mean, they're the Beavers. That's alone. That mascot should just get you thrown into the Yikes category. So, guys, thoughts on the Pac-12? Does Washington have what it takes to take down Mario Cristobal's group and get them to the Pac-12 championship game again? And then can anybody take care of USC in the South?
Yeah, and for me, where would you put USC? Are they the kingpin this year? Or are they right there in that tier 2? That, to me, that's one I think we really need to talk about. I think it's why we wouldn't put that, because I feel like we're both back and forth on this. I have them as tier 2. I don't really see them as that tier 1 team. Obviously, love Slovis's game. Drake London, great, probably one of the best wide receivers in the Pac-12. At Notre Dame, that's such a good game, too. I'm excited to see that one. Donovan, I'm going to ask you, what do you think hurts USC this year? Where do you really see like their biggest weakness?
Yeah, I recently read a quote earlier in the week from their head coach, Clay Helton, where he said they were playing around with their offensive line matchup, or their offensive line starting lineup, specifically at left tackle, right? Where he said that they had mixed between 3 to 4 guys at left tackle. USC needs to not kid themselves. They are not talented enough to bet on Kedon Slovis's health by playing around with their starting offensive line, especially their left tackle, just a couple weeks before the season, right? They're talented, right? Like you said, Kedon Slovis is one of the, top quarterbacks in the country, right? I mean, he's a good player, and it doesn't hurt them that they play in the Pac-12. But I think, I don't know what it is about USC. We know they're a blue blood program. They really are. But, I think Oregon's probably their biggest, stopgap in terms of in this conference, at the end, keeping them from going up into that tier 1.
I'm going to go on a limb and say Washington wins the Pac-12. Not only because they do have this Big Ten team in Michigan, who I think they can beat, I'll say convincingly. I don't think that's going to be too close to the game. I think Michigan's down bad. But you have one of my favorite tight ends in college football, Cade Otton, who comes back. And it was such a weird year, like you said, Blayne, with COVID last season. I mean, they played 4 games. The Pac-12, I mean, it just didn't feel, there's no rhythm. It was just like, I don't know. It did not feel like a real Pac-12.
It was all disjointed. It was a terrible deal.
Like, we're not playing this week. Game canceled. We might play next week. And it seemed all over the place. So it just didn't feel like an actual season for the Pac-12. But I like Washington. 10 starters back on offense. Like I mentioned, with Cade coming back, one of my favorite tight ends in college football. Great offensive line with Jackson Kirkland, who's probably, what would you say, a first-round talent, Donovan?
He's a first-round talent, absolutely. He's super talented.
So they've got everything they need. One of the top defenses that might actually exist in the Pac-12 this year. One of the top defenses over in Washington. So I think they play in the championship this year. I think they win because they do have this win over Michigan, which I think they're going to win pretty convincingly.
Yeah, and their third leading receiver was Drake London at USC, and he returned, so they're going to look to him to become the number 1 guy over there after they put him on Amon-Ra St. Brown in the NFL. Tyler Vaughn's went to the NFL, so they do have something to kind of make up there. They're only returning 70% of their offensive production from last year. That courtesy to our guest from last week, Pick 6 Previews, does a great job, so make sure to check that out. But guys, just looking at this USC team, this is do or die for Clay Helton. I mean, Clay Helton has been on the hot seat, and he's been fired and unfired 5 different times. It seems like, they've been playing, PR limbo over there, trying to figure out what's going on with the future of their program. So I think that ultimately, and we're going to go back and give our conference championship and our predictions for the playoffs for each conference really quickly, because to be considered a time here. But I do think that this is a huge year for Clay Helton and USC, not only because it's a hot seat year type deal for him, but also they have the pieces, I think, to be successful in the Pac-12, and then also they've had some tremendous recruiting momentum this recruiting cycle. They've gotten a 5-star from where I'm from, Michael Williams, down in South Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. That doesn't happen. I mean, you don't pull 5 stars out of Georgia and they're in the running for Christian Miller, a 4-star from Atlanta, defensive lineman. So they're really trying to start to make, and I think NIL has a lot to do with that. They have, right there in Los Angeles, they have a lot of possibilities with NIL there. So if they were to catch fire early and they were to have some success, they could, add upon that momentum they have in recruiting, because guys, look at what they open up with: San Jose State, Stanford at home. That should be a win. At Washington State should be a win. Oregon State win. At Colorado win. And then their first real test to me comes Utah at home on October 9th. So they could be sitting 5-0, be racking up a bunch of 4- and 5-star commitments in that time frame. So really big year for USC. So
yeah, Keontae Johnson comes over from Keontae Ingram comes over from Texas too, the running back. And then they got a wide receiver from Colorado, Katie Nixon, I think is his name. So they, recruiting well, and they're getting transfers too.
No doubt. So let's real quick, we'll go conference by conference. Are we all in agreement that it's going to be North Carolina and Clemson in the championship game?
Yep, North Carolina wins still.
You're taking North Carolina?
Yep.
Donovan, who are you taking?
I'm taking Clemson.
You're taking Clemson. I'm going to take Clemson as well. Much like your beloved Crimson Tide, Josh, I'm going to say until somebody knocks them off, I'm going to hold them in that spot of reverence. Then I'm going to go Big Ten. We're going to say in the East, Ohio State. In the West, who are we going with? Do we think Iowa or Wisconsin?
I'll say Iowa. I think Wisconsin still has a lot to work on. We saw really good Graham Mertz, and then we saw really bad. So I just think the consistency is not there yet. I think Iowa's the more concrete answer.
Yeah. So, and then out of those two, I'm going to say Ohio State.
Yep.
OH.
Yep. Oh yeah, IO.
All right, and then the final one, the Pac-12, we've got Oregon and USC. I think Mario Cristobal has this Oregon program really clicking and really start. I mean, Kevin Thibodeau is going to be just absolutely off the charts. You even talked about him, Josh, as being a potential Heisman candidate.
Yeah.
So I think Oregon is my winner in the Pac-12. Donovan, who do you have?
Yeah, I'm going to go Oregon, but I'll say this. We'll see how much potential they have for the rest of the season after Ohio State drops a 30-point win on them. And that's all I'm going to say.
Well, I think I said 30 burger. It's going to be a 50 burger. 30 point win, I'll say.
It's going to be tough for them.
I'm going to go against the Tide, no pun intended, with Alabama. I'm going to say Washington. I really do think they will do enough this year to win the Pac-12.
So you think they would have to preempt Oregon from even getting to? So you think Washington takes care of Oregon? Interesting.
I think so.
That's why you watch CFB Unfiltered, guys. We're giving you all the takes here. So now that we've talked about playoffs, guys, it's time to hit our Heisman candidates for the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12.